Welcome to all of you. My name is Attila Andics, and I'm very glad to have a chance to talk to all of you today at the Family Dog Project Conference 2022. 6 years ago, when we performed one of the very first dog brain imaging study, we discovered that dogs care not only about how we say things to them, but also about what we tell them. More specifically, we found that the reward response in the brain is only really there when we talk to dogs in a praising tone, but also if the words we say are the ones known to them as praise words. So when we say, however, nevertheless, with the most praising tone we can imagine, or when we say the known words we typically use to praise them, like well done, super, but without the typical praising intonation, then the neural reward response is not there. The brain responds with a reward signal only when both what we say and how we say it fits the praising context. So from this we learned that both what we say and how we say it matters, but we still had one question to answer. Okay, dogs care about what we tell them, but do they realize what language we speak? This is a question that we tried to answer now in a new study with Laura Kuaya and colleagues. And this study is now out in the journal Neuroimage. And I would like to talk to you about this very exciting study. So when we first thought about how to test something like this, we tried to find out what others did. We learned the most from infant studies, human infant studies, actually. So in those infant studies, researchers showed that very young babies distinguish between a known language and an unknown language, and they showed it by a faster sucking. So the sucking frequency increased when they heard a language unknown to them compared to when they heard the mother tongue. This showed that they can discriminate between the two languages. This is a finding in humans. Of course, this doesn't tell much about what happens in other species, because humans have many abilities related to language that other species definitely don't have. For example, other species don't speak. But there are some capacities, some language-related capacities that other species also possess. Still, there are no brain evidence so far in any non-human species for language discrimination abilities. There is no species in which a brain difference has been shown between processing the known language, let's say a mother tongue, a familiar language that the animal heard all over their life, versus another language which is completely unknown to them. So we tried to design a functional magnetic resonance imaging fMRI experiment to look into dogs' brains. For a dog to be able to participate in an fMRI experiment, a long training, several months of training, is needed first. During this training, dogs learn that the task here is to lie completely motionless. They are not restricted, restrained in any way, they are not sedated in any way, or they are not forced either. They are cooperating participants in these experiments, and they have to learn that this is the only task we expect from them, to lie completely motionless for several minutes in this strange, loud scanner in which we present them with different types of sounds, noises, speech via headphones. It's also important to note that our lab here in Budapest is one of the 4 or 5 labs worldwide able to conduct such awake dog fMRI experiments. So we were very happy to design this study, and I'll show you how it went. We selected the Little Prince story and read sentences from it in both Hungarian and Spanish. So for most of the dogs, Hungarian was the known language, the language that the owners speak at home, and Spanish was a language that they never heard before. For some other dogs, it was the other way around. Spanish was the language spoken at home, and they had very little experience with the Hungarian language. So we had Hungarian excerpts like this.
Jól csak a szívével lát az ember. Ami igazán lényeges, az a szemnek láthatatlan.
And Spanish sentences like this.
No se ve bien sino con el corazón. Lo esencial es invisible a los ojos.
But next to these natural sentences, we also had scrambled sentences, which were completely unnatural, and we used them simply to compare them to natural speech. So these scrambled stimuli sounded like this. And here is what we found. First of all, we found that dogs can discriminate speech from non-speech. So we found the primary auditory cortical region, which responded differently to speech and non-speech, suggesting that this region is involved in speech detection. But we also found another type of region higher in the processing hierarchy, the so-called secondary auditory cortex, which discriminated Hungarian speech from Spanish speech. This means that there were two different levels of processing of speech signals in the dog brain. One earlier region which processed speechness, and the later region which processed the familiarity of the language. It's very exciting to see that the dog brain is able to do both, and it's especially exciting to see that dogs indeed make something out of the auditory regularities that characterize one language but not the other language. That the language we talk to them matters because they do notice the differences, they do notice the acoustic patterns in the known language and how it differs in the other language. Beyond this main result, we also had some other interesting observations. First, we found that the shape of the dog head matters in the ability of detecting speech. We found that longer-headed dogs, so those with an elongated head shape, were better at detecting speech than shorter-headed dogs. The brain activity pattern difference was bigger in long-headed than in short-headed dogs. This is quite exciting and surprising a little bit also, because in other visual communicative cue reading studies, the opposite was found, namely that shorter-headed dogs are better and longer-headed dogs are worse. We are not exactly sure what the reason, what the real story behind these findings can be. We are thinking about the next experiments to find it out. We also had another very interesting observation, namely that the older the dog, the bigger the difference in the brain response patterns between the familiar and the unfamiliar language. So there was a better difference in the neural processing between the two languages in older dogs. And this suggests that dogs indeed learn about the familiar language which they hear throughout their life. They learn something about it, and it's not just that they detect the difference between the auditory regularities on the spot in the scanner first. It suggests that by time, years by years, they become better in this So this must be something about experience, about learning about this language. Of course, we are still not fully satisfied. It's very exciting to see the first ever brain imaging evidence in a non-human species for the ability to discriminate between languages. But whether it's something special for dogs or not, we don't know. It is possible that domestication, living with humans for tens of thousands of years, listening to speech across generations, made something in the dog brain, changed the brain in a way that it became more capable of processing human speech more efficiently. But it's also possible that it's not something special about dogs, and that other mammals or other species more generally could do the same. This is something to find out, and I hope that in some years I will be able to talk to you about these new results. Finally, I would like to thank all dogs and dog owners who participated in this study and in other fMRI studies over the years. Without this help, without this huge effort, we would not be able to do any of this dog brain imaging research. So thank you, and thanks to all of you for listening to my talk.